everyone. Welcome to our last HCPL Rights of Camp NaNoWriMo. I am Jennifer Finch, the branch manager of the Spring Branch Memorial Library. And this week we are meeting with three screenplay writers, Mark Rutros, Jordan O'Neill, and Nick Pinelli. Nick is the founder of FPP, which is a Texas-based producer, writer, director, cinematographer, and actor. He graduated with a Bachelor's of Fine Arts in Theater with an emphasis in performance from Stephen F. Austin State University. And Nick has directed and co-directed multiple award-winning productions on film and on stage, and was the director of the Houston troupe of the American Immersion Theater from 2016 to 2019. Nick's short film Tattoo, which he co-wrote with team member Samantha Walker, received an honorable mention at the Screen ATX Film Festival and was named Best Fiction Short at the American Golden Picture International Film Festival. Jordan was born and raised in Northwest Houston. His love for film and storytelling began when he first saw Jurassic Park at 6 years old and proceeded to wear out the VHS copy his parents had. He made his first short film in high school, then went on to study radio, television, and film at the University of Texas, focusing on screenwriting and directing as well as acting. Since graduating, he's won several awards for his passion project Fabletown, which he wrote, directed, produced, and starred in, as well as several honors for his unproduced feature screenplay South Tower, chronicling the tragic events of August 1st, 1966 at the University of Texas. He resides in Austin, Texas. Which leads us to our third screenplay writer, Mark Rutros, who wins the award for coming to us from the farthest away. Mark completed a creative writing master's at the University of East Anglia. Okay, and I'm reading off of a screen, obviously, and it just went off the rails. In 2012, and has written for radio, TV, online, and advertising. He has developed stories with some of the UK's leading TV production companies, and in 2016 won the Page International Screenwriting Awards and was a finalist in 2017. Mark has worked with Ramesh Ranganathan, and I did practice that, on his Sky One series, The Reluctant Landlord, writing episode 4 of series 2, and he's written on CBBC shows Lagging and The Dumping Ground. A one-off he wrote about Muhammad Ali called The Greatest of All Time was broadcast on Sky Arts in early 2017 as part of the Urban Myths season. It was an adaptation of a true story when Muhammad Ali tried to talk a suicidal man down from the 9th floor ledge, and was part of the season that was International Emmy nominated in 2018. Mark is a visiting lecturer at the London Film School, the Central School of Speech and Drama, and has also given masterclasses at UEA and the National Film and Television School. Thank you to our writers for joining us this evening, especially to Mark, who's joining us from England, where it is 12:36 in the morning. Now that we have all the introductions out of the way, we are going to go ahead and ask our illustrious guests some questions. If you have any, please just type them in and we will ask them as they come up. All right, so our first question is going to go to Jordan, because I know Jordan's actually got kind of doing a couple things tonight. But so Jordan, I know you have written several screenplays at this point, but Fabletown was a passion project of yours. What was it like constructing the outline for the series and then splitting the story into multiple episodes? Did you have any difficulties, or did it flow fairly smoothly?
Well, first things first, there was a missed opportunity here because my Jurassic Park poster is right there. And I totally forgot that was part of the bio, but proof of love over there. As far as outlining goes, this is going to sound like a brag, but it's really not, because it's never repeated itself since. Fabletown was always going to be, it was actually, so here's how it is. It was going to be a web series. And then what I realized after it took me a week to write the first very bad drafts, like one a night. And so that's what I mean by say it was easy. Like they all just fell out of me, and it's never been repeated since. However, what I realized after going through everything was that, and these guys probably know what I'm talking about, is that the 3-act structure was just so ingrained in me that that's what I had written without realizing I had done that. And I think most moviegoers actually know what the 3-act structure is. Like, in every kid's movie, when the character who's been withholding information, they're going to get got. They're going to find out. Like, that's the low point. So it was actually kind of almost backwards. It was finding a way to make this web series that was already structured like a film, how to cut it once we had already shot it into a film. So that was actually more difficult than just the structure part because it's just so ingrained in me that 3 act structure is what I know.
So our second question goes to Nick. So your company is called Front Pocket Production, which creates original pieces as well as promotional videos for businesses. What are some of the similarities and differences between the two? You're still muted, Nick.
Oh, great. For some reason, I was thinking somebody else was going to do it. I don't know why, but okay, great. Anyway, well, also just a quick thank you for having me on. My background was also acting and plays, stage plays like that. And just a little quick insight, which I promise will eventually answer this question. Um, uh, my background was acting and stage plays, things like that. And I ended up taking a writing class because the professor at my college that I really enjoyed and found as my mentor, he was a playwright. So I wrote with him and he asked me to do one extra assignment with him. I wrote it. He turned to me, he said, "Wow, this is actually like really good." He was shocked. I was too. And so, long story short, that play, the first thing I ever really wrote as a play, they ended up taking it to the Fringe Festival in Scotland that year. And so that was my first time out of the country. I was like so excited, cloud nine. And much like Jordan said, that has never repeated itself. Never quite been, never got to go back, but I did it once, and it was an amazing experience. But my background came from plays, from stage, and something that I've learned over time is that different medium all has different ways of communicating the same basic idea. Right? Told you I'd come back around to this. So plays a lot of times and TV shows a lot of times they're very talky, like the characters talk about what's happening, and then sometimes you kind of see it and all that kind of stuff. Whereas movies tend to be very showy, where instead of saying "I'm angry," you see it on their face that they're angry, or they'll like hit a bottle or something like that, right? And then transitioning recently over to commercials has been all about finding out what is our message, what is our story that we're trying to do, how do we get to that point emotionally, because emotions always will win out over just thinking about something a little much. So how do we tell that story quickly and emotionally and grab somebody's attention very, very quickly? So it's a lot of the same kind of concepts that you would find, again, even in that 3 act structure like Jordan talked about, but it's about making them fit into 5 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute or whatever. So it's figuring out, it's like the same basic structure, starting points, and then finding out what medium you're writing it for has been the real challenge and kind of the exciting thing about working on both different versions of what I do. Well, not the only one with the muting problem.
Never said you were. I think we've all learned over the last 2 years we all have muting problems. No, that makes a lot of sense. When you think about famous commercials, the one that's coming to my head right now is the little boy Darth Vader. And you got, the Darth Vader unlocking and locking the car door. And that told a complete story in that 30-second Super Bowl story. And, and there's so many now that are doing more thematic, more storytelling. And I think they've learned that that's really what, while catchy tunes and stuff may stick in the head, that the storytelling ones are the ones that actually catch the heart and make people remember and fall in love. So, Mark, you've written for a few different television series now. What is it like being part of a writing team, and how is it is it difficult to create a piece of a story that is part of a longer narrative?
I just want to echo what Nick said as well. Thank you for having me. And being part of a writing team, I enjoy, because the reason I got into writing was because I like being reclusive and at my laptop and not having to engage too much. But then writers' rooms are kind of essential. And so I had to get over that initial, I can't say anything in this room. I really enjoyed the writers' room from the perspective of it encourages that collaboration. It's a shared experience. You learn from others because you get to hear other people's anecdotes and stories and all discuss those things you've been through that you want to echo through characters. And I think the key to that is kind of being open and not self-editing too much. And it kind of helps you realize that writing is a process of imperfection, and doing that in a room with others makes it a lot more, makes you understand it a little bit more. Because I was really nervy. I had about 3 or 4 hours in a writing room where I said nothing. And I was there kind of going, I'm going to get fired tomorrow. And then I thought, right, that's it. I'm not self-editing. First idea in my head, I'm going to say this could be really bad. And it was, but it bonded everyone because they laughed, and then someone took it and made it a lot better. So I think it's kind of understanding not every idea that leaves our heads has got to be perfect, because it rarely is. And like Nick and Jordan know, that first draft you do, you kind of look back on it a while later and go, that's not as good as I thought it was.
It never sees the light of day.
No. And if it does, you wish it hadn't. But in terms of creating a piece of a larger series, I don't find that any more difficult than if you're writing a single narrative, because you're still writing a single narrative. It's just episodic. So you're still resolving something that you might leave hanging. What I find really difficult about it is the moving pieces. Like, I'm writing on a series now that's 10 episodes. And I got an email today going, oh, that character we had you writing in, we're getting rid of that character. And I'm there going, oh, now I've got to change everything again. So that happens quite a lot. And that's where it gets tricky, is, and it's no fault of anyone being like unprepared. It's a case of you create something, you write it, and then you realize in seeing a few episodes of it that actually this isn't functioning the way you'd hoped. So then they make those changes. So that's the biggest challenge with like a series, is that you will get an email when you think I'm nearly there, and you just go, I'm back to the beginning. But I love it for those challenges too.
It sounds like fun, honestly. The only bit of screenplay writing that I've done last year was the library system's centennial. And so we did videos each month for most of the months, except maybe the last couple of months where we were a little bit tired, celebrating the different decades of the library system that we have been around. So it started off in the 1920s, and I was in that video, but I didn't have anything to do with the writing of it. And then in February, for February, we also wanted to tie in Black History Month. So I came up with the idea of doing a radio show of kind of a mystery, Nick, kind of in that murder mystery style kind of thing. And then I did it with members of the Harlem Renaissance. That I ended up doing a ton of research, and I had, I can't remember her name now, a sculptor from the Harlem Renaissance being the person that her statue that she was presenting as part of an art at a library in Harris County as part of an event went missing. And it turned out all to be a comedy of errors kind of thing. And it was kind of what you would think a first screenplay might be. And it didn't help. And Taylor, who is our behind the scenes guru on this one, that she was one of our people that was in the video. So forgive me for saying this, Taylor. The acting was what you would expect from a whole bunch of librarians without acting experience. And Taylor admits that, it was bad. So, okay. So thank you, Taylor, for not making me, but I was not in the video as it was a Black History Month. And so we were trying not to have the really super pale person in it. But it was an experience I won't forget. And I also learned that maybe screenplay writing, while I know people that are involved in screenplay writing, and I could possibly, if I worked at it and took some classes, which I don't have time for, could possibly learn how to do it. It's not my skill, but I can definitely see how it would be fun working in a writer's room and bouncing ideas and creating a script together. Whereas I tried to do it with other people, but they kept having to back out. And so I ended up having to write the entire thing myself, and I was freaking out. But, I had as it was a radio show on film, I was having to try and describe the sounds effects that they were supposed to do, like the banging the shoes and things. And so I had a hard time putting in the script what I wanted other people to do. And thankfully, I was also on set when we were filming, so I could say, do this. So while it was in the script, they didn't understand. So how do you write scenes that aren't dialogue in the script? Like physically, how do you do that? I mean, I think we've all seen, at least in the Oscars, they show a little bit of what that looks like when they are giving out the Screenplay Writers Awards. But how descriptive do you make the scene setups? How do you write those scenes? And this does go out to all of you. So let's say, don't pick randomly who wants to answer.
I have a little idea. I'll go first, and then Jordan and Mark can correct me and show that they're smarter than I am. But for the big thing for me, is what you have to do is write some, and this isn't just for scenes with no dialogue. This is just for everything that you kind of have to think about. You have to write something that communicates to whoever the audience is. So if you are thinking in terms of your audience, your viewer, who is going to watch this thing and feel something or whatever, you're writing one particular way. That's when you write your dialogue. That's when you write and you kind of think, okay, I want an emotional aspect for these two characters, and I need this to happen in this interaction. I need them to see this. Great. But then if you go through the process of talking to a DP, which is a director of photography, the guy behind the camera, kind of setting up the shots and making things look right, or director, if you're not the writer, right? You hand over the script to somebody else. You have to communicate it to them. When they read the script, they have to know what's going on, right? So that they can set up and do their work, because your basic work is the first little step of creating this story, this world, whatever. Another great thing just to think about for those aspiring writers out there, screenwriters out there, which I highly recommend anyone do it, is if you get to the point where you start to get producers or executive producers, which start to be a lot of the final say and more money type people, you have to communicate something that they are going to understand as well, because they're going to be a big say in what is going on. So really the big thing that I try and think about in description is, will this communicate the thought that I'm trying to get across? So when it comes to, there are different paragraphs that I've written. I hate to give this answer, but there are different paragraphs that I've written that have been this long and then this long as well. And the exact same amount of action happens. It's just, what emotionally am I trying to convey at this point as well? What journey is this character going on? What am I seeing here? How do I want the person who's reading this to feel? The difference between somebody fell and somebody twisted their ankle and hurled themselves to the ground gives you a different kind of feeling, you know? So it's my initial thought there.
So the reason Nick's wrong, no, that was 100% correct, dude. Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'm glad he brought this up, the whole like handing it off to somebody. So because I studied screenwriting and directing simultaneously, and I'm an actor primarily, I kind of always write from the standpoint of being the director. Now, that's not exactly good if you are, like he said, trying to maybe sell something or give it to someone else. So what I have noticed that I've developed as far as like, patternly is that the first, like what we call the bark draft, right? The first 2 or 3 drafts actually, that's going to have a lot of description in the action, and that's a lot of times me also kind of writing in the notes of like, or writing out, the mental movies playing up here. I got to write down what I'm seeing up here, and then as the drafts become more revised, I try to think in terms of, you have an economy of white space on the page, and the more white space on the page, generally, the better it is. So you can be scripted, at least in the first drafts, of like, Jason runs down the 3 flights of steps. He pushes the door open. He turns the corner. You can literally, by the 5th draft, Jason exits the building, turns. And like you were talking about, Jim, with like prose kind of goes out the window. It's like a bunch of commas and kind of what we would call a run-on sentence. So, but it's one of those things where Nick is right, where you want to communicate as much information to who needs to know the information, be it the director, the DP, the actors, with the fewest amount of words possible. Because I think if you overdo it when you come to, like, say, the shooting draft, then okay, well, is this just giving enough visual cues, or am I robbing the actor of kind of making a choice, or the DP of making a choice? That's at least been my experience in the independent world. I'm sure Mark knows much more about this, though.
I mean, not really. Just echoing what you both said. To be honest, like, you know, it is a communicative document that goes into the hands of so many, and our job is, as writers, we're leading people on an emotional experience, and we want directors, actors, producers, cinematographers to understand that emotional experience, to then use their skills to create that, because, you know, we're the writer and then we go bye bye as they take it over and we're no longer involved. And, you know, the editor can only cut what is shot and performed. So if our communication isn't working, our intent won't always come through. And so everything we describe it has an intention behind it. Like, if someone nervously shuffles in a chair, we know there's a reason for that. They're hiding something. So you only really describe the things that are essential to the drama. But you will find I'm quite minimalistic with my descriptions, but then I will work with the producer who goes, I didn't get that, and I didn't get that, and I didn't get that. And you end up going, I'm putting in so many words that are making me slowly cry, which can happen too. But it's always just being about very deliberate in our intent. And then, you know, actors love it when there's less. So I think, as Jordan was saying, they can take that and run with it. As a writer, if I write in camera directions, a director folds their arms at me. It's like, come on. So you've got to also, you can still communicate how a shot might look. Like, if you were to say someone grimaces, you'll imagine what kind of people's visual eye will come into play there. So yeah, exactly what Nick and Jordan were saying really is it's about intention, and it's about, you know, it is doing it in a minimalistic way, but that comes with practice. Like, you know, I know you said you studied screenwriting as well, is you're kind of taught not to have big chunks of description, but if you're trying to be clear on something, it's totally fine. Like, you can break some of these rules can be a little bit too pedantic at times, and you can break them if it's for the sake of clarity and communication, because that's really the thing that trumps everything. I mean, I think I'm probably wrong.
Yeah, no, it's like you got to know the rules to break the rules, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly,
only 3 lines of description, but if you go read any Tarantino script, I mean, it's practically novels. Sometimes it's like, oh my god, dude, I have to like scroll back. Where are we? I don't even remember.
Yeah, and every script you read online has all the we see, we hear, all this stuff everywhere, and some camera direction. So yeah, it is that thing of learn the skill and understand it so you can play with it and know when you have to kind of fall out of those rules sometimes.
On the one screenplay I wrote, it was more of a matter of, what am I doing? And I'm trying to do this right. So it probably ended up looking more like a play script, which I have far more experience with, or probably more like, honestly, I used the murder mystery show scripts that we have through the American Immersion Theater. I ended up using those as kind of a frame of reference because that was kind of the way that the story was structured. But at the same time, yeah, I wasn't really that worried about camera direction or anything, because it was me, somebody who, the person who's in charge of our publicity, Nancy Hugh, who she's taken on the role of director, photographer, cinematographer, everything for our library system. And she's amazing. But I was going to be in the room with her. So I was just like, you know what? I don't know any of that stuff, because unlike all of you, I have no training formally. I had 1 year of beginning drama in high school. That's it. So just hearing all of this, it's like, I know that there's a science behind this. I know that there's a lot that goes on for it. And so hearing you, basically it's the same as most professions. You have to know the rules in order to know which rules you can break and bend as needed, if you know, depending on the situation. Most art is like that. Know the rules so you know how to bend or break and make it your own, is basically what I'm getting from what you're saying on this. And that, yes, sometimes, most of the time, you're going to want a little description to give the cinematographer, the director, and the actor choice. And sometimes when you have to the script has to sell itself, you have to put in a little bit more description so that people can be clear as to what it is. But we did have a Facebook question, and Abby Duckett commented, and she said, and this is going to everyone, have you ever, in writing your scripts for your respective projects, ever felt as if the opening episodes or opening shot is never quite perfect or captures what you're trying to get at? How do you get to a place where you feel satisfied with your project's opening sequence or first few episodes?
I mean, for me, that's like what I obsess over. It's like I'm one of those people that like I can never start like my essays for homework in high school. I could never get through them. Rather, I would have to skip the intro paragraph because I couldn't get it started. So I was like, come back to that later. So I obsess over that stuff, and I think you have to a lot of times opening shots of think about the most iconic TV shows. I mean, I can definitely looking at Fabletown, I know exactly what influenced me, and it was Lost because Lost starts with boom, just a super close up of Jack's eyes. And for some reason, I keep using that shot. I mean, they say like a hack only steals halfway and a master wholeheartedly steals from others or something like that. That's a butchering of that phrase, but I obsess with that because it's going to establish like tone and sometimes genre and just sort of like it's your starting point and we're off.
As I have seen at least the first episode of Fabletown, I do actually, I get where you're saying where your inspiration came from Lost a lot with your opening sequence and episode. I can see that, and even maybe a little bit tonally, but everybody's writing is inspired by somebody at this point, and nothing wrong with that.
I'm going to give a completely different answer, which I think might be nice. That's one thing I actually try really hard not to think about in the very beginning, because one of the reasons I think that NaNoWriMo is so good is because it just gets you to write. A lot of times when I come up with stories, ideas, things like that, the idea for a story might come from a phrase that I heard one time, or like I saw a picture in my head and I thought, oh, that would be a really cool like story to kind of build around that. Now, how do I work to get to that picture? When I first started, I didn't do any sort of like prep work. I was just like, let's go and just like write as much as I could. And I'd get about 3 pages in and go, all of this is awful. But then I have to tell myself, you know what, you gotta like just sit down and write it. And another story I like to tell is my first ever full-length play that I wrote. I wrote it. It only had 3 characters in it. I wrote the whole thing, got excited. I just said, every time something bad happened, I just like, whatever, just keep writing. So I reread it again. And at one point, one character was an only child, had 2 younger sisters, and then was like the youngest of 3 or of 4 or whatever. So it was like the continuity didn't make any sense, whatever. But I just wrote it all down. I spit it all out. And that's why we all say your first draft, just don't like it doesn't see the light of day. It's just about getting your story out there. Now, when it comes back, actually, this goes with the marketing aspect of a lot of different things that I've done too, is they talk about doing some sort of an attention getter, some sort of something that hooks you into the story. A general rule of thumb for a lot of like feature films is that by page 10 of the story, I should be fully invested, fully hooked by what's going on. And that's an arbitrary number, 10. It could be 5, it could be 20, whatever, you know what I mean? But that's generally like a good place to start off of. And so I think, okay, what is the tone of what I'm trying to do here? And how do I think about this? And then I also have to think constantly with what both Mark and Jordan have said of, I have my own artistic vision, but I'm about to hand it off to other incredible artists that are going to help me. So if I just start a scene with dialogue, one of my favorite opening scenes ever of a movie is The Godfather. And the way that movie starts is it's just 2 people talking. And it's actually an extreme close-up of, oh my God, I can't remember his name. Oh, well, but it's not the Godfather himself. It's somebody who's asking the Godfather for questions, and it just slowly pans out the entire way, which is visually you're like, oh, that doesn't sound interesting at all. But because the dialogue is so interesting and the performance is so great, I'm so hooked and invested. So what I think is, I don't I can't say because I don't know, but the writer probably didn't say, let's do a close-up shot of this guy and then pull out. You know what I mean? That's the director and the DP and everybody and the performer all working together to say, hey, this would be a great moment. Let's start it this way. And it could have just started just with the dialogue. So you've got creativity, you've got artists that will work with you, hopefully. And if not, then, hey, then you're in charge and you can do whatever you want. So that's also nice too. So I try not to think about my intro too much until it comes time to the refining and really getting it to that stage. It's kind of the opposite answer of Jordan there.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to try that.
Okay, what about you, Mark?
I think I have to try Nick's tactic too, because I get too obsessive. Because with like TV is kind of it's cruel in a way that they want you to hit it instantly. So they're like, get me into communicate tone, character, story within that first page or two, pre-titles, boom, off we go. So I'm there kind of going, how do I get all this information that I need to put into this tiny space while getting the tone? That first image has got to be quite active. They're always like, with kids, especially, like, can we go bigger, bigger, bigger? Even with a mini series at the moment, they're like, we need more of a hook, something bigger, bigger, bigger. Like, how do I do this? So I spend ages on the beginning. And then I get it to a place I'm happy enough that I can continue with the rest of the story, knowing I may go back and tweak stuff. But I need to know that the foundation is there so that the rest doesn't collapse too quickly on me. So yeah, I'll spend a lot of time on beginnings, and they'll change quite a lot. And yeah, it's a really tough one. I mean, in terms of how do you get to a place where you feel satisfied? When I have to hand it in, I kind of have no choice. I'm like, well, this is the best I could do with it. So I'll be satisfied when someone says there are no changes to come. That's when I get satisfied with the beginning.
Yeah, actually, one point to go off of what Mark was just saying there is, especially if you're going to try this kind of looser approach that I might be suggesting, just be very adaptable with your own script, with your own thing. I've actually also done this as different scenes where I've written it out. I knew exactly what I wanted, and the way that the characters were just talking to each other, I was like, oh, the ending is not, it just doesn't work. The original ending I kind of had in mind for this scene, for what we're trying to go for. So I either had to go back, change all of my dialogue, or I had to come up with a new ending that would work for this kind of thing. So like Mark was saying, be very adaptable, ready for change, because there's another great quote, which I'm going to butcher as well. So I'll be in the club, Jordan. But it's something like, true art is never really finished. You know what I mean? It's hard to be satisfied with the end product until it's just like, I can't work on it anymore because somebody else is doing it now, you know?
I think it's Pixar or something. They say like, yeah, our movies are never finished. They just get released because we have dates that we have to meet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's that famous story with Toy Story where the 90% of the film was accidentally deleted, but there was somebody one of the animators or somebody who was working on the film, I can't remember what her position was on maternity leave or at home, and she had the film backed up on her computer at home, and so they were able to resurrect majority of Toy Story from this person's backup at her house, which kind of is tangentially related. It's like, you never know what's going to end up with your script or your story. I mean, the actors are going to have, honestly, I'd love to see the original script for Iron Man, because I know that quite a bit of it was improvised by Robert Downey Jr. I mean, they've openly admitted that. So how much of it was actually rewritten by Robert Downey Jr. on set through his improvisations? And then the directors can change. It's like, oh, this line isn't working quite well. And then the actor might have a different way of phrasing something that feels more real to their performance of the character. And then the editors get their hands on it. So, I mean, the script this is what you have to give to them. And then, so after that, who knows? But so, I mean, as far as the satisfying, I can't have any knowledge of that, but I can imagine it must be kind of scary to hand that script over. So Kristen commented on Facebook, what's one piece of writing advice or a lesson you learned that changed how you approached the process? And Jordan, I'll let you take first jab at this one.
Oh, it's so tough. What's one piece of writing advice or a lesson you learned? Okay. I mean, this is a phrase I just heard not too long ago from a director I was working with, and I'd probably heard it before, back in the day, but it really kind of struck home that a movie gets made, or television, I'm sure applies to, it gets made 3 times. It's shot 3 times, right? You find it in the writing, you find it in the shooting, you find it in the post production, the editing. So there's that piece of advice, knowing that, like, it's almost like playing telephone. Like, yes, you might have like, oh, it is my magnum opus. This thing it's Shakespeare would weep at the words. It's not going to be what is shot and goes into the theater. Like, there's just no way. And that it's not necessarily a negative or a positive thing. It's different. It's going to be different. Because like you said, like, because then Jon Favreau is going to come in and have his idea. And then Denny Jr. or, I mean, Harrison Ford, some of his most memorable, iconic moments on screen are, I have a fever day, so I'm going to shoot the guy in Raiders instead of doing the whole fight scene, or looking at Carrie Fisher and saying, I know. That's not in any screenplays on this planet. So being adaptable, but I think, like, I'm trying to think of, like, I had a great screenwriting teacher at UT, Cindy McCurry, who was just full of these, pieces of wisdom, because she was a Disney fellow. But I'm trying to remember what she said. Oh, you know what? This is what helps. And she probably told this to us because we're all college students and not everybody's living with other filmmakers or film majors at the time. But it's really helped, and I've made my poor friends do this to this day, is you get non-actors to read your dialogue out loud. And if it's not working, you're going to know it's not working. Because actors, we try to, like, make the words work. That's part of our job, is to, whether that be paraphrasing or, adding tone and cadence or whatever. But if it sounds like robots talking when non-actors are doing it, and I mean like robots, like, then you've got to rework some dialogue. So that it served me pretty well so far, so I'll keep my fingers crossed on that one.
I think it was my creative writing teacher in Norwich at UEA told me, don't protect your main character. And that was something I really needed to hear, because I was writing comedies a lot. And what you would often have is you'd have someone in the middle of it, your main character, who was kind of the inverted commas normal person. And then everyone around them was crazy. So all the fun stuff was happening because the crazy people were doing all these things. They were the ones making bad decisions, being a bit over the top, while the person in the middle was really actually quite dull. And as soon as he sort of said that, a switch went off where I was like, yeah, it should be my main character who is driving this story, rather than, it's that, I'm going to butcher a saying now, which is, story doesn't happen to your character, characters happen to the story. I think that's the saying. But it's that character drives the narrative. They're not there just reacting constantly to events. So, if we talk about emotional experiences, it's because we're experiencing a character going through something. So don't protect your main character is ultimately the advice that stayed with me, and I've passed on probably incorrectly to a lot of people. But I find that is the thing that's really important.
I'm going to say a quote that I heard that terrified me when I first heard it. So wanted to give that. But I was listening to an interview with an author once, and what he said was he wrote something like 1,000-page book in a week or something like that. Right. And he said something to the effect was, I didn't have time to write I didn't have time for a second draft. So I had to write a really good first draft, was basically his quote. He just didn't have time for it. And I was like, oh my gosh. So that kind of resonated with me in the way that one of the big things that we all do is we kind of get in our own ways very often. That's kind of gotten to me and my whole approach, even why I think the way I do as far as opening scenes is, more than anything, I just want to get something out there. I have it percolating in my head forever and ever and ever. And then if I don't write it down, eventually it'll go away. So I always just try and spit out as much as I can. Again, NaNoWriMo is great for that because it's just about writing. I usually will write the scene until I'm out of ideas, especially for the first draft, right? Until I'm out, the characters are done talking, everybody just wants to leave. then they leave. You know, it's done. I look back at it, and because it's always easier to cut than it is to add stuff, is what I find too. So just that idea that like, hey, I don't have time to just like mess around and do whatever and think about everything. We got to get this stuff done. So that was always a really big quote piece for me, that just the idea of there can be so many reasons why you wouldn't write this screenplay, that all you have to do is just sit there and write it. Then you can figure out everything else, you know?
Well, I can say that's kind of what I did when I did my screenplay, but the problem is I didn't have the technical knowledge to go back and fix it. So, but hey, they didn't, the people who were not actors that were reading it, Jordan, they didn't sound like robots. They weren't great, but they didn't sound like robots, so I must not have done terrible. All right, so I have another question for all of you. So do you have any methods on how to write natural sounding dialogue? Now, Jordan, we already heard your give it to your friends and make sure it doesn't sound like robots talking. But anybody else, everybody, including Jordan, have anything else you'd like to suggest?
I once did this one exercise with a fellow person who enjoys writing. I'm not going to say a writer, but just somebody who enjoys writing, if that makes sense. And what we did was each of us had a character, right, that we wanted to be, right? And so like my character was like a husband and her character was the wife, and this is the scene, great. And literally what we did was I wrote out with a pen a line of dialogue, and then I passed her the sheet of paper. She looked at it, she wrote down her line, and then passed it back to me. And it was like our characters were having a conversation from the perspective of us, the writer. That really kind of taught me that when I'm thinking about these characters, I have to think in that person's mindset, right? I have been very fortunate to have been told several times that my dialogue ends up being fairly natural. And the way that that ends up working is I just generally think, okay, I know even if I start with caricature, that's a big thing too. If I start, this is nerd guy and this is cool guy, what would cool guy say here? What would nerd guy say here? Just starting there, I think it gives me a first general kind of thought process into that. And then I have, cool, there's nerd A and nerd B. Nerd B wants to get the girl, but nerd A is like has a hard time breathing, let's just say. So now it's two similar characters, but they both have slightly different objectives, and now they're doing this kind of thing. So I start to kind of peel back. I think, who are my essential, what is the essential idea of who this person is, their thoughts, and then putting them in a room together, how would they all think about the same thing? Right. And that's kind of where I start off with my dialogue, is I try to be as open and natural as possible. This also helps by being a great, if you can type really well, that's awesome, because then you can type really fast. Another problem is I think a lot of writers have this issue. Jordan, Mark, I'm sure you've been, and even Jennifer, I'm sure you've all had this. You had great ideas, and then you're like doing this on the computer, and then you're like, wait, what was my idea again? Oh no. So the faster you can type, that also helps. But those are all just general things I like to think about when I'm coming up with dialogue for my particular characters.
Yeah, that's all exactly. I just want to echo that. And you know, for me, the dialogue has to sound like what your characters would say, which comes back to what is their desire, intention, what do they want. That's where kind of conflict arises as well. But it just means everything they're saying is also driving the story forward, because dialogue has to also fulfill some other functions. Reading it out loud is something I have to do, and just making it sound like something they would say to the people they know, because we can slip into a habit where we're trying to say things for the purposes of the audience, going, they need this bit of information. Like, here's a really bad example, so I'm sorry. But, you know, someone might say, you didn't get me a present on my 29th birthday last year, and I'm angry. And you go, that information is purely for the audience. Whereas you might rephrase that as something like, are you going to get me a present this year, or have you already lined up some excuses? And you kind of, I don't know, that's a little more natural, I suppose, but it's not clear markers going, audience needs to know age and this and this. So what would they actually say to each other based on the historical context of their relationship as well? helps. But I mean, I thought I wrote natural dialogue. Then I watched something I wrote last week, and it did not sound natural at all. So I am not the voice on this. I'm.
Yeah, that's tough. I can't tell you that I think in those terms of like what is natural sounding dialogue. Because two of like, I think Aaron Sorkin's one of my favorite writers. No one in his movies talks like a human being, like at all. No one talks like that in real life, and yet we buy into it because there's like this rhythm to it. Or like Tarantino, it's the same thing. I think it's like what Mark was saying is that I come from a place, and what Nick was saying as well, of like we're going back to Fabletown as an example because that deals with like a lot of fairy tale characters, right? And there's a scene in the first episode where there are three princesses talking. Now, if we took just the Disney versions, like the old cartoon versions, you probably couldn't tell who's who. So the job I took upon myself was okay, I should be able to cover up or black out every character name on this page. And you should always know, even if they're only labeled A, B, and C, and I don't give you the names, you should know who's talking. And what helps with that as well is I did a relationship chart. Okay, I'm gonna take Cinderella. Okay, and I'm gonna write every character that she's gonna interact with. What does she think about that person? And does she think about them, or where does she start thinking about them? And that way that gives her distinct perspectives. Like he was saying, like, Mark was saying, you give me a present on my 29th birthday. Well, if they really don't like this person, but they're surrounded by other people who maybe don't agree with them, they're not going to be saying that stuff. They're going to be passive aggressive. What did you think of the gift I got you? It's fine. Like that, exactly what they're saying that's what I think from the actor side is playing with opposites as far as the dialogue. People say things a lot and they mean the exact opposite. So I go from like being more distinct in the voice of the character versus what I would call like natural. Now, granted, I've also looked at stuff, Mark, and I'm like, oh, why did they say that? That was way too, oh no. So you have to like kind of balance the two, but that's where I come from.
One little point I'd like to add as well. First of all, I feel like, oh yeah, I said I'm great at dialogue. Anybody who is watching this is going to go look and go, wow, that guy is, he's way off. So please don't, I feel bad now. I feel gross for saying it. But anyway, one other thing that I like to talk about with people who are starting the writing process is plays, screenplays, films, movies, a lot of them have different kind of things that are important, right? There are the characters that are in it, which we really care about. There's the story. These are called like different elements of the story. What's going on? What's the most important thing? Great example of this would, and then there's something called spectacle. Great example of spectacle is the movie Kong versus Godzilla. I'm not going to go see that movie to see the incredible character arc and what the story is. All I want to do is see a giant monkey punch a giant lizard. That's what I'm there for, right? So you got to think about what is your story? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to do something thematically? Do you want somebody to walk away from this thinking, wow, I never thought about that before? Or do you want somebody going, man, I really wanted this character to succeed, and you care for these people, right? And depending on what type of show, film, story you're trying to tell and what you find to be the most important is also going to affect how you say your dialogue, right? Jordan brought up a really great point. There are some writers like Aaron Sorkin, Quentin Tarantino, from the playwriting world. I think of Tennessee Williams, who it's not just what the characters are saying, but it's how they say them that is so fascinating. Shakespeare's whole prose versus being in verse and all that is all about it's all about how you say what you're trying to say, right? And it's so that way, even if I don't know what the heck those characters are talking about, I can still enjoy it because it's pretty. And that's that type of thing, right? So that's another big thing I would say. Just think about what is your story? What are you trying to have the audience, the viewer, get from it? And that can also kind of guide how your dialogue will go.
Okay, I'm a huge Aaron Sorkin fan, so I'm a huge West Wing fan. Just over and beyond, I own the West Wing on DVD, and it came with the first script, the episode of the first episode, and reading it, I mean, there's the famous walk and talk, which he, that became famous for West Wing. And one of the things that I try and keep in mind is that if you have certain actors in mind for certain roles, you're going to write for that actor as well, and how they speak, and how they speak and how they act and what their cadence is. Because he had Bradley Whitford picked out when he was writing it. He had Bradley Whitford picked out. He wrote the character of Josh for Bradley Whitford because he was actually supposed to be in The American President in the role that Michael J. Fox had. So if you notice, the character of Michael J. Fox actually speaks a lot like Josh does in The West Wing. The very fast-moving, kind of sarcastic, abrasive, arrogant character. And so I think that what you're saying is very true, but you also have to, so in the case of the natural storytelling, a natural sounding dialogue, you have to keep in mind that sometimes just you might have an actor that you're writing for, and that will change how the dialogue is phrased. And that kind of goes in. We had a couple questions. Another one's from Abby, saying that she's heard from an industry professional that a paraphrasing dialogue can come across as disrespect towards the dialogue in a script. As writer yourselves, and please forgive me, I live in an apartment complex, so if you hear music all of a sudden, that's my neighbors deciding to play music for the first time in several weeks. As writers yourselves, would you find paraphrasing a breath of fresh air, or would you rather the actors take it in a direction with your writing as a base of or a jumping off point? It's a loaded question, but how do you feel about that as writers? And then she continued, or do you want the dialogue to be verbatim? What's on the page is what's said back to you.
Go on, Jordan, after you.
I was just going to say quickly, from an actor standpoint, if I'm the actor, I try to get the line verbatim. Now, granted, if I recognize that, like, I can maybe drop like the 4 or the 2 at the end of the sentence, no one's going to care. If that's going to make or break, like, say, an audition, and they're too focused on, they're looking at the script, they're not watching me. When we're on set and I'm the writer, best idea wins. There's a scene in episode 2 of Fabletown that me and the other 2 actors, one of the actors, she's approached me, said, "I don't think this is working." I said, "Let's go talk about it." We just reshuffled the lines and it worked better. So best idea wins.
Yeah, I think as long as it doesn't take away the meaning of a scene, and I do whatever, I had a read through once where one of the characters that felt like the weakest on the page, because an actor elevated that character and played with the lines, they were suddenly a character where I thought, this has a lot more depth than I thought. They've saved this character from being like a one note, two-dimensional thing. So I think I kind of, actors, they're brilliant at what they do if you have good actors. So I'm like, if you see something better you can do with this, kind of, I've written this, I'm at the limit with what I can do with this thing now. Do whatever you want, as long as it doesn't change the thing entirely. So yeah, I'm kind of open to everyone making something better if it's for the better, obviously. So yeah, best idea wins, kind of thing.
Definitely in the same general vein on that. I like to think, the people that I work with on the projects are all incredibly talented at what they do. My job is to just get the story so it's there, and then the actor and the director's job is to make that story as great and interesting as possible. So yeah, if there's a little bit of improvisation or some changings to make things better, because that's the goal, it's always to make things better, then I'm all for it. The one little thing that I would say is, I've found myself doing this once or twice, is like, there might be some crazy kind of word, like if a character says, "Oh, you're doing like, you're just acting so kooky right now." Like, kooky is not a word that people normally use, right? But I wrote that word kooky for a specific reason. And if they're trying not to say that, then I might pull somebody aside and say, "Hey, this is what I'm getting from that character." Then the actor can say one of two things. "Oh, that makes so much sense." They'll do that. Or they'll go, "Yeah, but I saw this and this in the script." And I go, "Oh, you're so right." And we just change the word. So it's kind of like, there might be one or two moments that I'm a little bit particular about. But for the most part, everybody is working to do the exact same thing, which is make the best product possible. So why wouldn't I take a great idea when I see it? I
think you're muted, Jennifer.
All right, so we have time for one more question, and this is, but we have another question from Facebook, and this is coming from Casey. And this is kind of a loaded question here. Do you think Americans are ready for non-Western storytelling? I know, Mark might not be the best person to answer this question, or he might be. He might be the best person, but actually, yeah, I for mm,
I guess it depends what you mean. You know what I mean? I mean, I enjoyed the heck out of Parasite. I mean, and that's, a Korean film, but is it structurally still Western storytelling? Is it the three-act structure? Is it the hero's journey? I mean, and personally, yeah, I would be open to anything as long as the story is well told. It doesn't like, try to like retcon itself at the end or just go for something like I never buy into stuff that just goes for shock value at the end. Like I'm probably one of the few people in here. I'm gonna get a lot of flack for this, but I was not a fan of Ex Machina. I got to read the script before the film came out. I watched the film when it came out, and I was like, yeah, I still don't like it for the reason of I felt like the whole bait and switch just doesn't work. Now that's a subjective thing, but I'm open to I'm open to the idea of that like having been earned or working. So as long as the stories told well and the characters are compelling, then bring it on.
Americans ready for a particular thing. I don't know if that it's such a wide kind of group, everybody said that The Office would fail because they couldn't do it. And what they ended up doing with The Office was adapting it to a way that Americans could digest it. And now that American version of The Office is huge. Like that's the story that everybody has known, heard, all that kind of stuff. I think again, this is just a guy with an opinion, so like you don't have to listen to me by any means. I think that there are a few people out there who, for the most part, would like to see something new. But what you'll notice is you'll see sequels are huge and moneymakers and those kinds of things. It's like a lot of people like what they like. I like to say this. I kind of thought about this a while ago. Again, this is because I come from a play stage background. If you have local community theaters or even bigger theaters, what you'll see is a lot of them will be doing the same plays over and over. Everybody at some point has done Romeo and Juliet, West Side Story, whatever, these different things. Cool. They see them because the people who go to those want to see the same story over and over. But movies, you're looking for something new a lot of times too, right? I don't want to see a remake of Back to the Future. That's my favorite movie ever. You can't mess with Back to the Future, right? But it's also about getting money. So I don't know. I think some people like them, some people don't. In general, my opinion is probably not. In my humble opinion, I think westerns, the old westerns, cowboys, those should make a huge comeback. I love them. But that is not exactly what you were talking about at all. But too much wordplay there. Anyway, I'm done. I promise.
Well, Nick, it's funny you mentioned the old westerns because one of the things that I was going to bring up is that the Americans or the U.S. the U.S. as a whole has had a habit of stealing stories from other cultures or remaking things from other cultures for decades. We've had influence from Journey to the West, and we've had influence, especially from Japanese cinema and Chinese and Hong Kong cinema. I mean, Bruce Lee really brought a lot of the Chinese cinema over to the U.S. But like if you look at the old westerns, you were talking about that. I immediately thought of, and the hilarious thing is I can't remember the American movie title, but it was The Seven Samurai was what it was based off of.
Magnificent Seven.
Thank you. The Magnificent Seven was based off of the Seven Samurai, and there's always been a lot of influence from especially Japanese storytelling and Chinese storytelling in the U.S. So I'm not sure that it's not that we're not ready for non-Western storytelling. I think it's more that a lot of people are resistant to the idea of watching films not in English. And I know personally people that are very stubborn about watching film or media in English, and they refuse to watch it with subtitles because they don't read fast. they think that reading the subtitles takes away from doing the story. And yeah, in some cases they're missing out. In other cases, well, if they can find other media and art that suits them, who are we to judge? But at the same time, it's like there's many of us that do watch a lot. I mean, think about the large presence of people in the US that watch Japanese animation at this point.
Or Squid Game.
Or Squid Game. And
Just
I think,
remembered.
yes. So I think that in much cases, yes, Americans are ready for non-Western storytelling, especially with Parasite, with Squid Game. And I think we're starting to see more things coming out from different types of storytelling. For example, Coda, which I find, because that, while it was more of a traditional storytelling, it was told in a different way than what most of us are used to. Or Nick, you mentioned West Side Story. If you've seen it, I was amazed. Steven Spielberg did it where the characters spoke in Spanish on the screen and there were no subtitles. And the funny thing is, even if you didn't speak Spanish, you understood what the characters were saying. You understood. And it wasn't because they were the same. It was the same exact script, because they definitely adapted the script. It was not the same script. They changed quite a bit, actually. It was the same story, but told in a very different way. And they gave Tony a lot more depth, which I appreciated. But I appreciated the fact that he got that in. And I almost wanted to say snuck that in, the Spanish, but it was an intention. It was told in a different way. So in many ways, I think the US is starting to push a little bit, one step at a time toward, especially because of the success of Parasite, the platform. So I know quite a lot of people that love watching Korean dramas. So because of the success of those things, because the streaming media that has brought those television shows and those movies over, and it's more accessible to everybody, filmmakers in the US are starting to push more. And we're getting some more diverse filmmakers, which is helping a lot with that. All right. So Mark, did you want to take a shot about whether or not Americans?
Yeah, I think it's just with streaming services, the access is there for more opportunity. I think, it's not like where there are very limited places you can show things, and therefore you're always going to go for the choice of what is going to resonate the most with the audience and make them happy. Now it's, well, we can try and get some stuff in front of an audience without taking such a big risk. That's my completely uninformed opinion. Yeah, everyone's ready.
Well, thank you. And now that was all of our time for this evening. So thank you again, Mark, Jordan, and Nick for joining us this evening. If you enjoyed this program, please check out the other HCPL Writes videos on our YouTube channel. Next month, we will be back to our regularly scheduled once a month HCPL Writes, the second Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. on the topic of genre bending, what it is and how to do it, with more guest authors.